best defense money can buy beat the ever-living crap out of the Georgia Bulldogs on Saturday. Cam Ward's dream season is stopped by a bunch of nerds, and Alabama reminds the world of what a fully functional Jalen Milroe can do. All this and more tonight on the Nitro College Football Show. And welcome to the big show. I'm Burl.
And I'm Streit.
And tonight we cover the major storylines from week 11 of the college football season. And as we begin to wind down the 2024 regular season. If you like what you hear, we do ask for you to subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. It helps us grow. And we thank you for spending your time with us tonight. Okay, week 11, we'll start out with the drubbing of the Georgia Bulldogs. Ole Miss pulled off the biggest win of the weekend and really did beat the ever-living crap out of the Georgia Bulldogs. It was a tough game to watch as a Georgia fan.
Yeah, it was a complete dominance along the line of scrimmage. Both the offense and defensive side for Georgia struggled. They struggled to get pressure on the Ole Miss offense, and they could not block for anything against the Ole Miss defense. So it was definitely a struggle for Georgia to even move the ball. The game started out great. The first series of the game, Georgia got a sack and another pressure and got an interception, went right in, scored a touchdown. Great start. But after that, man, it was all Ole Miss all day.
Yeah, it was brutal to watch. It was absolutely the worst offensive line performance I think I have ever seen. I mean, it looked like they were in middle school going against college players. It was awful.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. So the Georgia defense, after they got the interception, Ole Miss came back out there. They had knocked Jackson Dart out of the game, and Ole Miss was forced to go their backup quarterback, Austin Simmons, who came in. He was a left-handed guy who ran and threw the ball really well. And I think that really set the tone for the rest of the game because, like I said, that first series, Georgia was kind of pushing their O-line around. But Simmons came in the game, hit a couple of key passes, and they went right down the field and scored a touchdown. And it was on from then. Dart ended up coming back in the game and playing the rest of the way. But I just think something about that freshman coming in just for that drive kind of changed the whole early momentum that Georgia had and wiped it completely away.
Yeah, it was almost like we changed our game plan after the first drive just because the new quarterback came in. And they definitely figured something out that they can throw a slant pass on us and we can't stop it.
Yeah, that's for sure. They were attacking the middle of the field constantly the whole game. And Dart, he took that injury to his ankle early on the first drive, and even he was still able to keep running. Georgia just had no answers. He was scrambling around, and Georgia couldn't cover. There was very, very little that the Georgia defense could do. Now, I must say the performance wasn't horrible as a whole. Georgia's offensive line was so inept that Georgia's defense was literally on their toes the entire game, and they did manage to keep them to field goals a lot in the second half, but it was still a poor performance from the defense, just not quite as bad as the performance from the offense.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of synergy there that the defense counts on the offense producing. In Georgia cannot run the ball,
right?
Flat out, they cannot run the ball.
And,
we have no running game. We haven't had a running game all season. The best running game we had, I think Etienne had 86 yards or something against Texas. So we haven't even had a 100-yard rusher.
Right. And I think part of it's injuries. Obviously, Roger Robinson, Branson Robinson being out. Etienne was playing in this game. He ended up only having 6 carries, I think, the whole game. So he was clearly not at 100%, not full go. They gave Nathan Frazier a chance to run the ball a lot. However, he fumbled a couple times, and it just was not a good offensive performance. A lot of people are throwing some shade at Mike Bobo for the play calling. Georgia ran a ton of screens in this game. I think I saw that their average depth of target was the lowest ever in the Kirby era. It was only like 4.5 yards. It was ridiculous. But I think that was designed because I think the Georgia offensive coaches knew that they couldn't protect. The only chance that they stood was trying to get rid of the ball quick because their receivers were not getting down the field and getting separation, and they couldn't block the Ole Miss defensive line.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And when you have an aggressive defensive line like Ole Miss has, screens are great to run if you can execute them. Unfortunately, Georgia's receivers have feet for hands, so it drops even more passes, and it blows my mind. Last year, Dylan Bell was a highlight maker. Like he was great. This year, he's lost a step or something.
I think this year he's looked at to be a 1. Dylan Bell was not a highly ranked recruit coming out of high school. And I think when you had guys that could take a little bit of the targets away from him, his targets became more valuable. You could also use him a little bit more in the backfield like they did last year, as a running back or even on sweeps and things like that. But this year he's looked at as one of the go-to receivers out there. And I just don't think he's that athletic. He's a little bit stouter of a guy. Still a great player, but he's not what you would call a number 1 when you're in the SEC with teams that got players like Ryan Williams. Like, he doesn't compare.
Yeah. The wide receiver position is totally lacking at UGA. Really, like the last really great receiver we had was A.D. Mitchell. And he finished up at Texas.
And he wasn't a big-time recruit. He was a 3-star guy that really developed. He didn't play his senior year of high school, so he was a little bit under the radar. But, yeah, I mean, in terms of big-time receivers, Georgia hasn't had one since Pickens.
Yeah.
A true 5-star difference maker that you can just look at him and say, hey, that's a dude.
An absolute dog.
Right. Now, the hope is they've got a couple of really good recruits that are committed. C.J. Wiley just committed last week. He's a big kid. If they can get a couple of good receivers in next year, that will help. But for right now, this is what they got. It gives me a lot of feelings about the 2019 Georgia team, especially after Lawrence Cager went down. We just had nothing.
Yeah.
It was essentially
our whole offense was just back shoulder fade.
Right. But at that point, the only thing that team had was George Pickens, and then he got suspended for the first half of the SEC championship game, and they didn't have anything else from, only threw the ball outside the numbers. And I'm kind of getting those similar vibes right now, except we don't have as good of running back talent and offensive line talent that they did then. So,
and I think our running back talent is up there, but if you don't have a good offensive line, it doesn't matter how talented you are in the backfield.
Right.
And Saturday is a case in point of that. Georgia couldn't run. Georgia couldn't pass. Beck had 0 time. And honestly, I thought Beck played well, given the fact that he had 0 time to throw and his receivers were dropping the ball.
Right. Yeah, he threw a couple of good balls that, were dropped. The interception was late in the game when, Ole Miss was able to just pin their ears back and go. They knew that Georgia had to try to get the ball down the field. The Georgia offensive line wasn't blocking. I mean, the interception and the fumble, I didn't really put those on Beck. That really was not his fault.
Yeah, same here. And, you hear the calls for the backup quarterback. The backup ain't going to do any better against that defensive line if the offensive line is going to do lookout blocks. And there's plenty of video out there of Georgia's offensive line stepping up to make a block and not touching a soul.
Yeah. Now, one thing to point out is, as much as we're ragging on the Georgia performance of the offensive line, the Ole Miss defense played lights out. The Ole Miss defense, as we've joked about, is the best defense that money can buy. Lane Kiffin even said it in his after-game presser. He said when they came to Athens last year and Georgia put 52 on them, he said their goal this offseason was to go out and build a defense that could compete with Georgia because they got whipped so bad last year. The 3 guys that you kept hearing about on that D-line, Princely Umalin, I don't think I said that right, JJ Pegues and Walter Nolan. I mean, those three guys, all portal guys. Princely came from Florida, where he was a 7.5 sack guy a couple years ago. JJ Pegues was at Auburn, and he's a huge guy, but he was so quick. He was playing tight end at Auburn. And Walter Nolan was the #1 player in the country coming out of high school, going to Texas A&M. These weren't just your average, hey, these guys weren't playing, they transferred. These were your big-time free agent transfers. And Ole Miss has fully bought into that philosophy that they are going to buy the players that they need to compete. And it's perfectly legal. And it's a difference in philosophy that Georgia has not gone with so far. Georgia has spent its NIL money on recruits and developing players, intended to try to supplement with the portal, whereas a team like Ole Miss has focused on spending its NIL money in the portal and using its recruiting and development to supplement those guys. It's a difference in philosophy, and it's a reason that a team like Ole Miss can beat the crap out of Georgia this past Saturday, but lose to Kentucky earlier in the year. It's just the talent is there, but they don't always gel, and especially when they're new guys that haven't been there long. And I think you're going to continue to see this. This, as I've talked about, it's more of the NFL-like environment with the expanded playoffs, with essentially free agency every year. This is the new philosophy, and we'll see what wins out. This year you've got a team that's kind of doing it both, and that's Ohio State, who has always built well through recruiting, but also spent like crazy. So at the end of the year, we'll see. But in this game on Saturday, Ole Miss certainly won out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ohio State's actually doing it right because they still are having top 5 recruiting classes. But now they're able to, like you said, supplement that with, proven talent that has playing experience. And I think Georgia's philosophy isn't necessarily wrong or bad. It's just a different way of doing it. And I think it's been proven that it works. I think that this year, though, for whatever reason, we just don't have the same caliber of talent that we had in 2021, 2022, even last year.
Right. I think you will see some changes in the Georgia philosophy in that realm this year. I don't know if you pay that much attention to recruiting, but in the last few days, Georgia has got some new offers out to mobile quarterbacks. They'd also previously been in pursuit of Juju Lewis from Carrollton, who's been committed to USC for a while, and Georgia kind of had backed off him for a while when they had Jared Curtis committed for 26. They just announced that he's going to be visiting this weekend, and it seems like they might be turning the heat back up on that recruitment.
I did see that.
Yeah.
I did see that.
Like I said, they're turning it back on. They also offered a Mississippi State quarterback commit who is a high 4-star guy as well. So seems like Kirby is maybe a little frustrated with not having a super mobile quarterback back there. So we'll see if that leads to a change in philosophy.
That's what's typically beaten his teams.
Right.
Yeah. But I mean, really though, it's great if we can, continue to get top-notch talent at quarterback position, but if we're not getting talent at the offensive line position, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Cyril's classes on the line have been fine, but they have not been what they were under Pittman.
No.
Not even close.
No. So. It's this year it's frustrating. It's frustrating to watch. Especially, from day one against Clemson, we line up and can't run block to save our lives. And that's with Etienne, even after he came back. No, he didn't play at all that game. But, once we finally did commit to the run with Frazier, it got better. But a lot of that was him making plays.
Right. So now Georgia's got to turn its attention to Tennessee. The Vols come to Athens this weekend. Game day is coming. Even Georgia off a loss, it's still by far the biggest game of the weekend. And Tennessee is currently first place in the SEC. They've only got one loss, that being to Arkansas. So they're tied with Texas for the SEC lead right now. Georgia is favored by 10 points. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's going to drop really fast. But then today you hear that Nico Mailava may be out on Saturday. He left the game against Mississippi State this past Saturday. They never really said what it was, but he was kind of seen after the game walking with his parents with his head down and a towel over his head. And there were some rumors that he might have had a concussion. Josh Heupel kind of lived it up that he was fine, but then there are reports out today that he is indeed in the concussion protocol and may not be there Saturday. So Georgia could get another backup quarterback. They have a fifth-year quarterback. I wouldn't call him exactly scary. He has not been that, lighting the scoreboard up in his 4 years in Tennessee. What are your other thoughts on the game?
Couple things. So number one, I fully expect Nico to play. Coaches do this all the time, sandbagging, who they're going to play going into the game, forcing, the other team to prepare for two quarterbacks, which I think Georgia would do that anyway this week. Just given that we already knew about the injury, Saturday. Number two is, even though there is a backup quarterback playing, it's almost kind of like a relief if you're Georgia, because you've had such a tough schedule this whole year. Number one toughest schedule. And all the games have pretty much been on the road. Georgia hadn't played at home in over a month.
Right.
We played more top 25 teams on the road than home games this year.
Right. The SEC office absolutely did Georgia no favor with the schedule this year. After this Saturday, Georgia will have played 4 teams that are currently ranked in the top 15. No other team in the country has even played more than 2. Georgia had to play 3 of those on the road. Of those teams that have played 2 or eventually will play 3, they've all had at least 1 at home. Georgia's played 7 straight SEC games, 5 straight weeks away from home. This schedule is just absolutely daunting, even for a team that was operating at full go, because every week it has been tough. Every week on the road, even the best of teams would have had trouble with this schedule, which I think is the reason that, even people are talking, if Georgia loses this week, they're probably not out of the playoff conversation, even with 3 losses. And even in an SEC where you may have a ton of teams that end up tied with 2 losses.
If we lose a third game and the offense doesn't show any improvement, there's no way they're making it to the playoff. All the equity that has been built up over the past couple of years, I think that goes out the window, because we can't run the ball and we can't throw the ball. I mean, we can't score.
I think if it's a low-scoring game and the Georgia defense plays well, I don't know if they necessarily would be eliminated because of that. The Tennessee defense is one of the best in the country. They haven't allowed 20 points in a game all year. So when you play a good defense, I don't think they would get discounted as much. I think if Georgia can come up there and hang with them, Tennessee like I said, is a defensive football team built around the running game. Even if they don't have Nico, Dylan Sampson is their MVP on offense. It's not Nico. Dylan Sampson might be SEC Offensive Player of the Year this year. He's been absolutely amazing for them. So if it's a close game and Georgia loses in a defensive struggle, I think they would still have the inside track on a playoff spot. I know that sounds weird, but just reading what people are saying, Heather Dinich was on TV today talking about it. She's kind of ESPN's playoff guru. I mean, she was talking about other people, but she said Georgia, because of the schedule, would still be in that conversation.
Well, I mean, I hope so. Regardless of if we win or lose, I still want us to make the playoff. No doubt there. The Tennessee really does worry me as a fan, because they are pretty much built the same as Ole Miss when you look at how they play. The very stout defense. They have a really good D-line. They get after the quarterback. Then they get a lot of tackles for loss. And on offense, while they haven't necessarily been lighting it up in the passing game like we've come to expect, Georgia is very susceptible to the deep ball. Right. And Tennessee Heupel is going to test that. And in years past, there have been times where it's a game of inches and the ball is just off the tips of the fingers of the Tennessee receiver. They've had several of those deep balls like that could have changed the complexion of games. And a little bit of luck was on our side to get those to be incomplete. But even if it is the backup quarterback, if they hit one or two of those, that changes how, we've seen it. It changes how our defense plays.
Number 4, Miami, went to the flats at Georgia Tech and lost 28-23. Miami's undefeated season is over. And with that, maybe Cam Ward's Heisman Trophy candidacy. He did not have a great game on Saturday. Georgia Tech was pretty upfront about what they were going to do. If Haynes King was in the game, they were going to run the football. If that backup quarterback was in the game, they were going to pass it. They switched him out throughout the game, and Miami just had trouble stopping the run game with Georgia Tech, even after Georgia Tech lost a couple of running backs to injury. You kept seeing moments in the second half where Miami looked like they might get it going. They had one long touchdown. They got within 5, but they had a couple shots there at the end, and Georgia Tech held on and just kept the ball away from him, and Cam Ward couldn't get it done. He threw an interception, and that was all she wrote. The Nerds of Georgia Tech take down Miami 28-23.
So last week, I apologized to University of Miami about not trusting them. And I said that I would trust them because they have Cam Ward, and he has been fantastic. Well, damn it, I take all that back. All of it. They're frauds. How did I get fooled?
I think, making some great plays and a weak schedule can do that for you. The ACC race is now very interesting because now Miami has 1 loss, but of course Clemson now has 2 losses. So that pony in the room is SMU lurking there. If they can get into that ACC championship game, they're probably going to be the team that would go to the playoff. So we'll have to see what happens in the next couple of weeks. Everybody thought it was definitely going to be in Miami, but I'm not so sure anymore.
Yep, the fighting Craig James is. I'm excited about SMU. I've been riding that horse for the past few weeks. It's an interesting race. It'll be fun to see, how it ultimately ends. It seems like the ACC is just devouring itself. They could just keep beating each other.
Yeah, which is what you're seeing in a lot of these conferences this year because the conferences have grown in size. You're having top-heavy conferences. You see it, obviously, in the SEC. You're seeing it in the ACC. You're seeing it in the Big Ten. And you're seeing it in the Big 12. All the major conferences have a couple teams that have kind of risen to the top, and then as the season drags on and they start playing each other, losses start building up. There really are very few undefeated teams left now. You've got, Oregon, and you've got Indiana, and you've got BYU. But outside of that, I don't think there are any other major conference teams that are left undefeated. So,
none that come to mind. So that being said, how many teams do you think get in from each conference?
Right now, it's looking like the Big Ten is seriously pushing for 4. Oregon's number 1. They're not going to lose a game until potentially the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State and Indiana play next weekend. So one of those teams is going to I would still think it's probably going to be Ohio State, who ends up going on to play Oregon in the Big Ten championship. But that would leave Indiana probably with 1 loss and not having to play in a conference championship game. So their schedule is super weak, but I still think there could be a chance that they get in. It'll be a conversation between them and Penn State. If you have 2 11-1 teams, maybe they both get in, maybe they don't. But it'll be some competition, between the SEC side where at this point, I think the SEC probably gets 4 teams in as well. If you figure 4 from the SEC, 4 from the Big Ten, you're going to have probably just 1 from the Big 12. and probably just one from the ACC. And then, you get your group of 5. So that'll leave one wild card between SEC, Big Ten, and maybe ACC getting a second team in.
And Notre Dame.
Oh, shoot. There's Notre Dame. Yep, never mind. There is no wild card. It's Notre Dame because they're pretty much already in. The only thing Notre Dame has left is to play Army. Notre Dame played Florida State this last weekend. I was going to talk about it a little bit later, but I'll talk about it now. FSU falls to 1-8 or 1-9 at this point. They fired most of their coaching staff. I don't know if I've ever seen a collapse season to season worse than what has happened at Florida State this year.
Incredible.
From undefeated conference champion to absolutely pathetic on the field.
Yeah, I was actually talking to a Florida State fan yesterday, and he was just telling me that DJU completely destroyed the team, in his opinion.
And
I was like, well, that makes 2 schools he's done that to.
I think they had a lot more problems than DJU.
Oh, for sure. You don't go from going undefeated to going 1-9.
Right.
I don't even know how you do that.
Yeah. I have no clue either.
Like if Kirby Smart left Georgia tomorrow, I mean, there'd still at least be 2 or 3 years where, you're going to get 8 wins, 10 wins.
Right. Right. You're not going to have one win, and it is absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I feel for the Florida State fans. I really do.
Norvell just got a huge new contract extension too. He played old Florida State like a fiddle, saying Alabama was interested. I don't know if they actually were, but worked out for him.
Gosh, too bad he didn't go to Bama.
I know. So we were talking about Notre Dame. So like I said, Notre Dame does take on Army on Saturday. So that'll be Notre Dame's last kind of real challenge. Army is 9-0. And if Army wins, now Army, after this, they have one more game and then they're off before what would be their conference championship game because they play Navy after the season. So if Army happens to beat Notre Dame and they go on to win their conference championship, I have a hard time believing that an undefeated Army team with a win over a top 10 Notre Dame would not get the nod over Boise State. I know Boise State's only losses to Oregon, but I just don't see how they don't put Army in, even if Army loses at Navy the week after their conference championship.
If Army can beat Notre Dame, maybe they take their spot and you get 2 group of 4 teams.
Right, because Notre Dame would have 2 losses to essentially, not power conference teams. So
exactly. That's interesting. That'll be wild.
Yep.
Go Army.
So, some other things that happened this weekend. Colorado is now on a path to make the Big 12 championship. Things have lined up for them, and it looks like most likely they're going to get there. They most likely will be taking on BYU. I don't know if you saw the end of the BYU-Utah game, but lots of people are claiming that the fix is in for BYU because the Big 12 Conference understands that Colorado may end up being their conference champion. And if that happens and they want to get a second team in the playoff, they need a team that went undefeated in the regular season. So it was late in the game. Utah was up. They had BYU backed up near their goal line. I think it was a 4th down. They stopped them on this play. And then all of a sudden, a defensive holding penalty came out of nowhere. And the crowd had went nuts, and then they called this defensive holding penalty. You want to talk about a ticky-tacky called defensive holding penalty. It was horrible. BYU ended up keeping the ball. They went down the field and kicked a game-winning field goal. So there was lots of people saying, hey, the fix was in. Big 12 Conference made that old Alabama call to keep BYU undefeated.
Did the fans throw stuff on the field, though?
I don't know. I don't think so. We saw that happen at LSU this weekend, and we'll get to that one in a second. But
yeah, so good for them.
yeah. So our last game of the weekend to talk about is Alabama went down to Baton Rouge and put a hurting on the Bayou Bengals. Jalen Milroe was looking like Jalen Milroe did when they played Georgia. He had 185 yards on the ground and 4 touchdowns. LSU had no answer.
Yeah. Alabama goes as Milroe goes. He's the entire team at this point. And it's amazing when he has really good games and scores a lot of touchdowns, or is responsible for a lot of touchdowns. He never puts up, gaudy passing numbers, but they're good enough. And he's a stud. Like he's a grown man.
He's very, very fast.
Very fast. And you can't teach that.
It was a great game for him. And for LSU, they still had a position to, be in the SEC championship game. But after that, I don't know. They've still got to play Florida. They may lose to Florida if they play like they did in this game and they did in the second half against Texas A&M. They just look lifeless.
Yeah. You think Nussmeier's been hanging out with Beck?
He might have. I honestly, I don't think it's Nussmeier. Honestly, it's weird you say that because I think Nussmeier's situation is similar to Beck.
It's very similar.
LSU, for all these years, has known rushing attack. They have nothing at the running back position right now. They are getting nothing. And I feel like it's all the pressure is on Nussmeier to go out there and make stuff happen.
Well, the other thing is they've always had the stud receivers.
And I think they still have a couple of stud receivers, but they just don't have anything in the backfield at all. And you just can't win that way in the SEC.
Got to run the ball. Got to be able to run.
As much as even the teams that put up crazy offensive numbers, like these Tennessee teams the last few years, they're great running teams. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to run the ball and control the clock sometime in these games, especially week-to-week grind in the SEC. And LSU's gotten away from that. I don't know if that's a Brian Kelly philosophy or it's just a result of, Texas coming back and kind of taking some of that recruiting ground back that LSU shares with them or what it is, but it's not the same LSU, certainly.
No, it's not. And yeah, the excitement in that game was done after a few minutes, and it was insane to see the LSU fans just empty that stadium so fast.
You're not used to seeing Death Valley empty early on a Saturday night. Yep. So now for Alabama, they've got the inside track to get back to the SEC championship game. If Texas wins out and Alabama wins out, there are some scenarios with ties. So I'm not sure what it is, but either way, Alabama is now in a really good position either to get a spot in the conference championship game or get that coveted number 5, which I think is the best spot for any team to be in, avoiding your conference championship game, but getting a home playoff game and then getting that number 4 team in the second round. So Alabama's got themselves set up nice. A lot of their fans were angry earlier in the year, but they're getting hotter at the right moment, and it may be another Crimson Tide fall for us.
I mean, they've got one of the best resumes in the SEC.
Right.
I mean, they do. I hate to say it.
A home win over Georgia and a road win over LSU.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And the Vandy loss doesn't look that bad anymore.
No, and the loss at Tennessee doesn't look bad because it's on the road.
Exactly. And it was close.
Right. So that'll wrap it up for this week. Once again, if you like the show, please give us a subscribe. It'll really help us out. Leave a comment below, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for watching.
See ya.